Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I did a video on Seder going after a libertarian. I hated that video. At the very least, I think I'm going to hate that video. There was something I wanted to articulate the first time I watched that video that did it perfectly the first time, and I get around to the video and it's not exactly the way I like it. So there's another part of the video that I want to see. There's a part of the video that I want to actually talk about. And I want to talk about why they do it. It's around the minimum wage. It's a great conversation. And again, there's a little bit something more here than I think what they're getting at. What's his name? Look, it's bare bones. The argument boils down to this. He's talking to a libertarian. They're arguing about the minimum wage. Now, he's making the argument that the minimum wage is a bar, or is something of a bar of entry of people who want to get essentially hire people of jobs. It hurts jobs. Sam Seder's point in this is it hurts jobs if you take it to ridiculous extents, but your argument doesn't necessarily stop my argument of increasing the minimum wage to certain degrees allows for more money to be in the bottom part of our society, essentially a floor. So one cat wants to say, well, no, it's not a floor, meaning a minimum. It's a bar of entry. Let's hear their argument. My contention is it terrifies me that this guy's a professor and not able to keep both things in his head at the same time. The point is both are true. It just depends on the degrees. Also, all jobs are not jobs that are specific, meaning this person is doing a specific job and is worth this much. That's nonsense. There are plenty of soft jobs that are subjective in regards to their value. Let's be very clear. From the standpoint of a capitalist that is paying somebody to do a job, they want to pay the least amount that they can pay. That's the incentive structure in this. You maximize your profit. How do you maximize your profit? You pay that person the least that you can pay, because the more that you have to pay your worker is the higher that you have to sell your product. You have to get your money back on your return. All of this is a cost-profit analysis. I'm not hiring anybody unless I am making enough to hire someone else. Let's hear a little bit of this argument. Let's see. Let's do it this way. All right. Let's hear a little bit more of this argument. This argument gets weird, to say the least, because Walter Block cares about blacks so much. Oh, he loves the darkies. Let's hear him.
Paid for the elevator operator at the old minimum wage of 40. But he will pay for he wouldn't pay for the automatic elevator when the minimum wage was 40, because then the unskilled labor and the unsophisticated equipment was very competitive with the more sophisticated automatic elevator. But when you price people out of the market, which is what you're doing with the unskilled labor, you price them out of the market, and at 70 cents, they all lost their jobs.
Yes, I know. I mean, again, that's not an argument against the minimum wage. It's against the raising the.
Look, yes, that's true. But again, that's not really the argument. It's Sam Seder. He's arguing with Ghost. That's not the argument that's being made here. I would agree with you that if you're making a company, you're making widgets, and you're selling those widgets for less than it takes to make those widgets, you're going to go out of business. No, you can't increase the minimum wage to the ridiculous degrees. I can't say that the minimum wage is now $50 an hour, because essentially a whole host of people are going to lose their jobs. Fair enough. But that's a different thing than saying the minimum wage is going up by $1, by $2. By measures where productivity has just blown out of the window, out of the doors off, in large measure. Let's let him keep going.
Minimum wage by 75% for elevator operators. But
well, look, suppose they raise it just from 40 to 45 or something like that, or suppose we raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $8, which is a moderate increase.
Mm-hmm.
What about all the people who have a productivity in between $7.25 and $8? Suppose I have a productivity of $7.50, and I'm happily employed right now, and now all of a sudden they raise it to $8, and I lose my job. And what about the people right now at 725?
But there's nothing in the real world without. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But there's nothing in the real world.
Sam, you are interrupting. Let me just finish the sentence.
What Seder is probably going to tell him is anything that you do is going to have consequences. And if what you're trying to do is dump more money to the bottom rung of society, then yes, doing that will impact individualistic jobs. But on the whole, everybody else rises. Let him make his point. I want him to get to the point where he starts screaming. Screaming is funny.
Go ahead.
What about the people whose productivity right now is $6 an hour, and we have a minimum wage law of $7? Do you know what the unemployment rate of black teenagers is in the inner cities?
Yeah, well, in the inner cities, it's in the 20s, and
it's
in the 30s.
It's in the 40s.
I'm always tripped out how right-wingers go to this. It never fails. When they want to kind of get across the compassionate nature. Sam, you ever think about, the poverty in the inner cities? Like, how many of those blacks could be working, doing shining shoes and stuff like that? You ever think about that, Sam? I mean, when you're talking about those minimum wage and people being able to take care of themselves, you ever think about all these blacks who need a job? Let's let them talk about these blacks who need a job.
Which is in the stratosphere. This is horrible. This is a very, very bad situation, and the unemployment rate, the real unemployment rate, is even higher than that, because the unemployment statistics only count you if you're actively seeking a job. But if you've been actively seeking a job and your productivity is $5 or $6 an hour, and you haven't been able to find one for a year or two, through the magic of accounting, they don't count you as unemployed. So the real unemployment is just horrendous. And, these young black kids, when they're in effect told by perhaps well-meaning people such as yourself, although not everybody who favors the minimum wage law is well-meaning, when they're told, in effect, that they can't get a job and they have to twiddle their thumbs and they get bored and they get into trouble and they go to jail, this is just a horrible situation. And well-meaning people such as yourself, I think you're well-meaning, I have no reason to think you're not, are just fooled by this. The logic is...
What is the value of making $5 an hour if you're living in New York City?
It's better than zero.
Well, but what is the value of it? If you can't feed your family, wait a second. Don't interrupt me here.
I'm sorry, I've interrupted you. I apologize.
I understand. It's all right. I'm used to it. The point is, if we cannot provide a living wage for people, if the market cannot provide a living wage for people, then what is the value of it? I mean, if they cannot go out and rent an apartment, if you cannot go out and feed your children, if you cannot get health care, what is the value of that $3 an hour job, $2 an hour job? Because I imagine you don't agree with the idea that the state should be providing any assistance. What is the value of that? I mean,
right there. Meaning you want it both ways. You don't think that the state should be involved in the marketplace, meaning you don't believe that the government should be making jobs. You don't believe that the government should be providing governmental assistance. And conversely, at the exact same token, you don't believe the government should even be able to make a minimum wage. So private enterprise is supposed to be the only edifice by which people employ themselves. I think this is a horrible proposition. You've essentially gotten rid of any notion of collectivism in this. Meaning you're stopping the government from doing something to maintain things for the people within that particular society. You want private enterprise to run the show. And that's the argument. I mean, ultimately, this argument boils down to, I want government to stay out of all of it. I want private enterprise to be able to have control, run the set, to run the table. I don't want government involved. Now, Sam Seder's point is, and let me make my point. I'm not going to say Seder's point. I think it's odd that people coming together, the 90%, look at the world through the lens of the capitalists. I think it's weird. Both points of view that these guys are arguing, for the most part, one person saying, we as a collective come together to make certain decisions that are in our best interest. One of those is, if we're going to have a market, and if we're going to say the government hands off a lot of this stuff, then at the very least, you should be able to pay people a decent wage where those people can live in society. Meaning, be able to buy an apartment, pay for their kids, you know, pay for the milk, pay for the Cheerios, pay for the Xbox, whatever it means to be a decent life or a basic life. His point is, it doesn't really matter whether or not a job can support a decent life. Even if you're making $1, even if you're making $2, hey, that $2 job is better than not having anything at all. To what degree is it better? That's Sam Seder's point. How is that better? If you want hands off from the standpoint of collective action, by the same token, simultaneously, you also want a situation where these guys are able to essentially pay people as little as they want to pay people. This would have a secondary bonus of pushing down the amount that people earn. Let's let these guys finish. There's a point where they start screaming, and I want to get to the point of the screaming because screaming is hilarious.
Where does that leave society if we have masses amount of people? You mentioned New York. I mean, we know that in the 1920s we had literally 20,000 people living on the Bowery, literally on the Bowery. I mean, what is the value of that then? How is that a more ethical society that we live in?
Sam, let me ask you a question, and just answer my question, because I didn't want to take it elsewhere. Which number is higher, 4 or 2?
I'm sorry?
Which number is higher, 4 or 2?
This starts to get stupid. He's making this point of saying somebody making $2 an hour is better than making $0 an hour, as if you get his argument. I'm not going to belabor this point. I did the other video on this. Look, if you're opening a business, we as a government, as a collective of people, let's bring it down to what we are. Our society, for the most part, is held together under this idea of government. And in a schoolboy way, we consider government to be this kind of edifice of the people, or at the very least to inflict public will. Fair enough. Now, on the left, we look at the government as being this tool of pushing back against corporate influence and this kind of taking over of the state, this cannibalizing of the state. Personally, I would want the state to be making all sorts of jobs, because us as a collective is not necessarily looking at this of profit. We're looking at this and doing the thing that we're doing. If we're putting out Social Security, the goal of Social Security is to apply and the care for the people in our society through the means of Social Security. There's no ulterior motive for it. The goal of it is not to make profit. The goal of it is to do the job that it's intended for. In the case of the capitalist, that's not true. It always boils down to, how can I maximize my profit? How can I make as much as I can make? Part of making their profit is labor. How do we decrease the cost of labor? Now, if the government opens a job, that job is to do a particular job. The same thing is not necessarily true for the capitalists in this case. They don't like this idea that government creates jobs for the sake of creating jobs, because they don't want to compete with government. It is difficult to compete with somebody when their interest is not maximizing profit. So if a Medicare, for example, his goal is not to maximize profit at the whims and the foibles and the hurts and the pains of the people who are involved in the case and injured, whereas your healthcare company is. It is going to maximize its profit off of your cancer, off of your backaches, off of your knee pain. There's a difference in the way that these things operate. Private enterprise never wants to compete with government. The argument here, and oftentimes what takes place is, well, fine, if government is not going to create those jobs, then the market needs to make those jobs and take care of the people in our society. Well, right here, you have somewhat of an issue here. That's not their aim, nor is it their objective. It is not the objective of the person who opens a business to hire you. He wants to maximize his profit. You're just a means to an end of him maximizing his profit. That needs to be understood. The idea of Walmart being this kind of social thing, its job is not to be social. Its job is to make profit. It just so happens needs employees in order to make profit. But in order for it to make profit, it needs to pay those employees as least as they can pay those employees, so they can sell a product at least as they can sell that product, to make as much as they can make it and expropriate wealth to the top. It's a company. It's a business. If that company can't pay human beings a decent wage, and by a decent minimum wage for which they can live, then what's the point? Then what's the point? Why should we allow you to open a company and pay people shit and piss if you can definitely afford to pay people more? Certainly Walmart can pay their people a decent wage. Walmart just doesn't pay their people a decent wage because that allows the Waltons to get billions of dollars. I'm making a point here that this argument about a minimum wage and everything else, if you are a capitalist and you want to hire people to do a particular task, then yeah, it's a pain in your ass to have to pay people a decent livable wage. If you're a person who's just trying to make a living like the majority of the population, then you love that minimum wage because that minimum wage keeps you employed at a decent level. Not just that, it's a sticky on how low capitalists can push the wages down. It depends on how you look at it and the perspective that you're taking when you look at it, whether or not it's a hurdle or whether or not it's a floor. For 99% of the population, it's a floor. I'm putting the video at the bottom so you can see the entirety of it without my commentary. And somebody, let's see, who helped? Sham Sheepherder, you're killing me with these segments. Every smug I hear makes me lose 20,000 brain cells. I ain't fair enough, but come on, he's right on this one. He's right on this one. This is a good argument. I love to hear Sam Seder argue with libertarians because often he's right. He's within my sandbox on that. Smug, yes, doesn't make him wrong, especially in these type of cases. Yeah, for whatever reason, my brain is not necessarily firing in all cylinders, but I hope I made the point that I'm trying to make with this. Look, we can get into conversations. Personally, I would go far further. I mean, granted, I'm called communist and everything else. If we have things that we need to do, then we as a collective should do them. And I don't want to be purely reliant and dependent on private enterprise. Let private enterprise do what it do. But we as a collective should also make decisions about the things that we need. So this idea that our employees, that we have people hanging about without having a job, I agree with this guy, is insane. We have all sorts of things that we should be doing in our society that we, because of our political class, don't take an initiative to essentially do them. Like I said, we have all these food deserts. I mean, imagine in the same way that we pay people to go and kill people, that we also pay people to go and actually take those rundown buildings and have food shelters. We have all of these things where you can have nutritious food, automate the process so it's little to no work in that process, and have that food given to people who want it for dirt cheap prices. I'm saying there are all sorts of creative things that we can do as a collective and as a society. We just don't do them. We are stuck waiting for private enterprise to do things that there is no incentive for them to do. The argument that these guys are having here, the crux of that argument is that, by the way, this difference between private and public enterprise and how much interference the government should have in the marketplace. These guys want none, but by the same token as you being part of the 99%, do you really want everything that you depend upon boiled down to a profit motive? How much homelessness is there in California? Do you believe that private enterprise is going to do anything about it? All right, I'm going to end this here. I have other segments that I want to do, but I hated my last segment. Yes, I'm probably going to leave it up. I feel like an asshole, but I have others, so I will see you guys shortly. Aaron Matei goes after Ryzen. Ryzen calls in to The Intercept. I'm sorry, Ryzen calls in to, Jesus Christ, my brain, for whatever reason today, calls into Real News Network with Aaron Matei, and Aaron Matei eats him alive. Ryzen has a hard time explaining himself, and the moment that the conversation turned to, hey, also, I want to talk to you about the woman that's in prison now that's going to be there for 5 years, Ryzen has to make a quick departure. So that will be next. I will see you guys probably within, I'll see 30 minutes. I'll be back by 2. I can have a lunch break. Thanks, guys. Oh, If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And I don't know who this is, Sham Sheepherder, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.